Good morning and welcome to the plenary program of the Female Tech Heroes Mentor Sessions. Thank you for watching because it's a special day, because today marks the second edition of the Female Tech Heroes Mentor Edition, where 32 mentors are going to coach more than 120 high-tech talents on different topics such as entrepreneurship, work-life balance and leadership. So for those of you who don't know us, Female Tech Heroes is an initiative that strives to create more diversity in the tech world. We bring people together, also online, during COVID-19. We make sure to put female and male heroes in the spotlight and tell their story and to create awareness about diversity in tech and also bringing more women to the tech world. So today we're going to talk about all kinds of different topics, but at this plenary program, more people are watching. It's a free webinar just to be inspired about leadership, unlocking people potential, good leadership for a better world. A great title, and we even have a better speaker, Natascha van Boetzelaer. She connects and advises top digital talents all over the world, and she creates opportunities for them. We're very honored to have her here today. She's partner at Egon Zehnder, and she's going to share her personal story and her insights on leadership. And I promise you, we really didn't discuss what we should wear today, but we kind of look alike. So give her a very warm welcome. Natascha.
Thank you, Ingeloe, and fantastic to be here. Delighted to be with you all this morning. Although I wish it was in person, and there are very few people sitting here in this studio, but of course, welcome to all of you at home. So for more than 15 years, I've been advising organizations, leaders on who they could become, how they can become the best version of themselves. And I'm going to be sharing some of those insights with you. But first of all, let me tell you briefly about myself. Well, first and foremost, I am a mother of two fabulous teenage boys, 17 and 15 years old. And I am the partner of a Canadian man who lives in Geneva. Slightly complicated life, but that's not for now. I was born in Malaysia, and then when I was 2, moved to London and grew up in London and in the Netherlands. So my schooling was in the Netherlands. Then when I was 17, after graduating from high school, it started as a gap year. I went to Canada. My stepmother is Canadian. And I ended up completing my whole undergrad university degree at McGill University in Canada. I studied honors econometrics, loved data and understanding really what was behind economics. And then I started my career in London. At that time, this was the late 90s, 97, there was the obvious choice was investment banking or strategy consulting. My father was a banker, and he said, when I see women coming into banking, I would prefer you to become a strategy consultant. That's probably going to open up the world more broadly for you. So obviously, I took my father's advice, and I started in strategy consulting. And from that day on, I really got into TMT. So for about 2.5 years, I worked with clients all over the world, advising them on their tech strategies. And maybe I was the only European one at the time from our office, which is now Oliver Wyman, to work with clients around the world, to work with our American colleagues on the internet strategies. And then at that point, that something woke me up. In '99, I decided, but hold on a second, this is way, way too exciting to just be a strategy consultant. And I was introduced to someone who led a venture capital firm called Arts Alliance. And that fund only invested in consumer internet companies around the world. We had an office in London and an office in New York. And that's what I did for the next 6 years. And I absolutely loved it, working with entrepreneurs from all over the world, learning and seeing how much they were dedicating their life to make happen what they had come up with. And moreover, of course, then deciding to invest in teams to make that happen. During those years, I also completed a corporate finance degree at London Business School. And then in 2005, for personal reasons, we moved back to the Netherlands. I did a brief stint then at Gilde Buyout Partners in private equity. And shortly after, in 2006, I joined Egon Zehnder. That was 15 years ago. And I feel incredibly lucky at the journey I've been able to have at Egon Zehnder, working with talent leaders around the world and mostly advising them on their digital talent strategies, developing digital talent and unlocking their potential. I also spent 3 years in our Hong Kong office, which was absolutely fascinating, 2013 to 2016, just being part of witnessing culture and leadership in Asia. And since 2016, I've been back in Amsterdam and delighted to be with you here. So normally, the conversations that I have are behind closed doors. They are private conversations with our clients, with candidates, generally one-on-one. But the reason I'm sharing some of these insights and learnings with you here today is because I think there's a huge shortage of people at every level who are truly capable of meeting what we need in today's world. And secondly, because not enough of us find the way of being who we really can be in the place where we spend most of our time today. So at some point, Egon Zehnder would have been called an executive search firm. We don't like referring to ourselves as headhunters. We don't see ourselves that way. Today, we refer to ourselves as a global leadership advisory firm. And we are committed to unlocking potential because we believe in leadership for a better world. That is our cause. And what we do is we ask and answer who is the real person behind the experiences, just behind the work experiences. We're searching for the true depth, the true essence of leaders and of their teams. What makes them unique? What are they uniquely good at? And most importantly, how can they unlock their potential to both individually and collectively? And my invitation for all of you this morning is to imply some of that curiosity to yourself. So I'm sure you all agree with me that today's workplace has become significantly more demanding. There are no amounts of previous work experience or business school degrees or stretch assignments or high potential programs or even conferences like the one where we are now that really fully prepare us for the pressure and the complexity that many jobs evolve into, especially, of course, in the tech sector. And so increasingly, our work at Egon Zehnder is about closing the gap between what we are capable of today and what we are asked to do in our jobs. And so because of that, we're determined to unlock that potential. So what holds people back in their lives and their careers? And let me talk to you about two patterns that we're seeing. The first is that the more successful we are, the more blind we become. And the second involves how we view ourselves, the way our identity can become in the way of who we can really be. So let me talk to you a bit more about this blindness. What do I mean by this? And why is it a problem? And obviously, what can you do about it? So let me share a story with you. There's an executive we worked with who is the CEO of a large platform company who consistently delivers great business results. He's incredibly competitive, he's driven, and he drives his organization, the people around him, very hard. The downside of that is that there are people in his organization who are not so happy. There are people who have left, other people who are looking to leave. People have joined competitors. But he kind of just sees this as the collateral damage of the results, the business results that he's delivering. And although his shareholders are thrilled by the great shareholder value that he has created, they're now realizing that this is no longer sustainable for the longer term. At some point, this is going to come back to bite them. And people in the organization are also starting to talk externally about this. So the shareholders asked us to work with this CEO because they felt otherwise he wasn't going to be in that job for much longer. So we often quite see that success can blind us. And why is that? Firstly, because often the way we have been working has served us well. Success makes us confident, and we stop asking ourselves why it is that we do what we do. And secondly, because we're too busy. How often don't you hear people around you say, "Oh, I'm so busy. I'm so busy." It's almost like this medal of honor, I'm busy. But when we're just focused on results, we're kind of getting to this tunnel vision, and we often forget other things that are really important around us, such as relating to people. And what's important to realize is that when you become more successful, when you become more powerful, it doesn't just affect you. It also affects other people. So the people around you are less likely to share openly with you what they're observing. They're less likely to give you honest feedback. And you're also less likely to know what is really going on in the organization. So what's the solution to blindness? It's curiosity. At Egon Zehnder, we've analyzed data from 30 years of assessing leaders. And those numbers show that curiosity matters more than any single factor in a person's future potential to take on senior roles. There are also other dimensions, of course, that are very important. We look at people's determination, their resilience. We look at how they make sense of the world, so their insights. And we also look at how they are influencing other people, their engagement one-on-one with others, but also their engagement with larger groups of people. But it really is curiosity that leaps out as the single factor that matters most in determining potential. Curiosity predicts how highly executives score across the 7 core leadership competencies, such as their results orientation, their understanding of the market, their leadership abilities, and how well they drive improvements and results. And contrary to popular belief, remaining open and staying curious is not the opposite of being focused and executing. Now, all of us are born deeply curious, but under pressure, we shut down. We forget our more curious selves. And curiosity is what drives us to find solutions to complex problems and to innovate. Think of the many technology companies that were started to solve a problem. If Travis and Garrett hadn't been truly curious, they would probably just be frustrated and annoyed again when they were standing at the Paris evening curbside waiting for a taxi in the rain. But instead, their curiosity drove them to find a new solution to ride-hailing. We need curiosity to solve complex problems and to take advantage of the opportunities that we're seeing, especially, of course, in the sector that we work in technology. Technology continues to offer us huge opportunities of advancement, of disruption, of further innovation. And I talk about complex problems because we've pretty much solved all the complicated problems. Complicated problems are those that require a technical skill, such as building a car or running a drug trial or knowing which problems our customers truly want to buy from us. We have the expertise to tackle them, but the unsolved problems we have are much more than complicated. They are complex. They're unpredictable. For example, if you're in a traditional company today, how do we tackle technology disruption? How do we get to move a huge workforce and change the way they're thinking? How do we get them to innovate? How do we engage them? In those kind of problems, there are no clear sets of variables. There's no data. So how do we solve them? By experimentation. And as we are experimenting, we need to look and learn from what is working and how to adapt based on what we're seeing. It's not about trying harder, it's about thinking differently. It's about connecting the dots in a different way. And according to some of the analyses we've done and reports from others, in those organizations where curiosity is role modeled, there are fewer decision-making errors, and there is less conflict and much greater group performance. So when I assess a candidate for a role, I want to know, how do they respond to feedback? How open are they to learning? How open are they to change? And so if we look at the scale of curiosity, on the one end of the scale are the people who we call have emerging levels of curiosity. So they will listen and they'll accept input from others, and they'll allow for changes when necessary, but it's not really their strength. On the other end of the spectrum, you meet people with extraordinary levels of curiosity, people who don't just embrace change and learning, but people who truly are excited and energized by it. Let me give you an example. There's another client who was looking for a CEO and asked us to assess 3 of the large division leaders. So the first candidate, he did about 90% of the talking to his team during all the meetings, and he had fired several people who had disagreed with him. And by the way, on paper, they all looked great track records, but obviously in talking to them and then taking references from the team members, this is what we learned. The second one listened to everybody, read a lot, was deeply interested and curious when it came to strategy development. But then when it came to execute, she shut down. It was all about her way of doing it. And that was her way or the highway. The third, he listened to the people around him, recognized what different perspectives there were, and actively sought out people with different views. He ran experiments, he set up the data function reporting directly to him, and he watched the results. He saw what worked, he asked others, especially those with the diverging views, and also watched what didn't work. Well, I'll leave it up to you to figure out who got the job. Highly curious people engage the world. They engage situations, their teams, their colleagues, and they do that differently. They assume less, they ask more questions, they ask different questions, better questions, and they value not just what people think, but what people feel. Think about it. How often does someone ask you, how do you feel about this in a meeting? And they actually really listen to the answers they receive. They're not just asking it because it's part of what they're supposed to do. They listen and they take it in. They pay extra attention when the data does not confirm their ongoing assumptions or their habitual way of doing things. Perhaps also think about, how often do you ask a question that you actually know the answer to? It's going through the motion. It's not really being curious. And the type of curiosity that predicts your future success does not limit itself to asking questions about the world around you or the business issues that you face. What we observe most about the most successful people is that they remain just as curious about themselves. Every single one of us carries what we call self-limiting beliefs. We have assumptions about ourselves that are old, that are wrong, or that are just too simplistic. And if you aren't aware of that, if you aren't curious about how and why you are as you are, if you aren't curious which habits help you, which serve you, and which don't, well, then you're trapped in being who you are and remaining who you are today. Because actually, you might be the person that stands in the way of becoming who you really can become. I think every human being is born to want to grow. And what we see is people who are curious, who create opportunities to grow, are those people who feel most alive. So how might we become less blind and more curious about what we're capable of? Let me talk to you about identities. Our identity is shaped by our life story. It's shaped by how we were raised, the family we were born into, the values that we were given at home, the big life events that happened to us or that we chose for during our life, and obviously the ones we still have ahead of us. But also who we think we are today, and who we hope we might become. Our identities run very deep, and we are incredibly complex beings. Our identities are also what we describe ourselves. When I introduced myself, I said, I'm a mother of 2. I'm a partner. I was born in Malaysia. That's all part of my identity. I could have also said, my parents divorced when I was 4, and this is how that shaped me. I myself got divorced 5 years ago, and how did that impact my life and who I am today? So those identities can be very difficult for us to examine, but they shape every experience we will ever have. And so it's essential that we become curious about our identities. And when we work with executives, we often find an aspect of their identity that stands in the way. Let me tell you more about that. There seem to be 2 main identity traps that we fall into, and those limit who we can and will become. The first is that we're overly attached to the roles that we played in the past. We confuse the role who we are as a person. And let me be clear, you are much more than the role that you play. And the second is that we neglect or even abandon parts of ourselves that don't fit into our more habitual ways of being. So let me give you an example, again, a personal example of the first one. So when I was in strategy consulting and in venture capital, it was very much about the content, getting the details right. In my very first assignment as a strategy consultant, the senior partner came up to me and said, Natasha, you are not to speak at this first client meeting. You can join, you can listen, but you are not to speak. At the second meeting, he said, only speak if you really have something that you are 100% convinced of that is going to add value to the meeting. Obviously, I did not speak. And it took me a while with that input to find the confidence to speak. Then later, when I was in venture capital, I had fantastic colleagues. Most of them were men. We had an office in New York where there were mostly women, but in London there were mostly men, where I was based. And I was always so, I would say, psychologically intimidated when we sat in the meetings with the entrepreneurs. And of course, for those of you who are in venture capital, you'll know that every meeting, it's about a different type of idea, a different concept, a different sector. So you very quickly have to shift your mind and try to understand what is it that makes this idea, this business model successful. It's a super way to train your mind. But I was always, as I said, intimidated by how quickly my colleagues seemed to know what they were talking about and asking questions. And at some point I woke up and I thought, but hold on a second. They have no idea what they're talking about. They're just asking a couple questions and then it comes across as if they know what they're talking about. Whereas for me, at that point, I still felt I had to know every single detail about a sector, about a company, before I would talk about it. So those roles in the past don't serve me today when I am seen as an advisor, a sparring partner for top executives. So I've had to let go of those roles and step into who I am today. And I'm sure I'll come back to that later. And I think unless we remain curious about ourselves and what we're capable of, and unless we question the more limiting roles we tend to play and why, then we'll be stuck doing what we have always done. So becoming curious about your identity accelerates your ability and your willingness to learn and change. Why is that? Well, I suspect it's because our identities are often anchored in the past. Very often now, assessing people, I go back to their childhood. I go back to understanding where, in the essence, still most of the identity is formed. If you think about it, most of the firsts are created early on in life. And secondly, because our identities act as habitual shortcuts, so that we don't push ourselves past our comfort zones. Because we rarely question our identities or really practice trying new ones, the way we see ourselves is both incredibly powerful and yet a nearly invisible aspect of why we behave as we do. But by doing so, helps you shift away probabilities and limitations to stretch into more rewarding future possibilities. As Einstein said, once we accept our limits, we go beyond them. And let me close with coming back to the curious leader. So in my experience over these 15 years and in working with so many different types of people struggling with the issues we all face, there seem to be at least two profoundly effective routes to achieving this. One, remember that success can make us blind. Whenever you feel certain and determined and confident, most of the time, that's the clue. So I'm going to say that again. Whenever you're in a situation where you feel confident, you feel certain, that's when, from now on, something should trigger in you. And it's time to pause. Ask yourself, what do I not know about this situation? And how might I find out? The second is by noticing how our identities encourage us to look backward, not forward, to get stuck. We all have moments where we have the opportunity to become so much more. And if we're being asked to consider a role that at first doesn't fit with how we see ourselves, then it's worth asking, what if I could do the role my way? Am I sure this opportunity is not for me? So don't look at the person and their identity that was filling that role before. Think about the role itself, its challenges, and then how you might fill that role with your identity. Or when we are already in a role and our experience or the feedback suggests a problem, then asking yourself, is there an old way I need to release? Is there another part of me that needs to step aside? So my advice to you all this morning is, be the curious leader and see what opportunities unfold.
Thank you so much, Natasha, for this inspiration. Please, we have a lot of questions, so I brought my laptop with me.
Great.
My personal thought was, you had such a long career already. What is the best advice you were ever given in your career?
Oh, I feel incredibly lucky because, first of all, I've had people around me also today who trust me, who've given me great opportunities to grow. But probably the best advice is from my partner, who is a fantastic leadership advisor himself. And he at some point told me to stop playing small. To stop playing small. And at first I got angry and it triggered me and I thought, what do you mean playing small? And the more I thought about it, the more I understand. I'm still working on this. So let me tell you a little bit more about what that means. So somewhere inside me, I'm still a little girl. I'm still that little girl who's trying to prove herself. As I mentioned to you, my parents were divorced when I was 4. My father stayed in London. My mother, my brother, and I moved back to Holland. And there was always something about proving the little girl to my father.
Making them proud.
Yeah, making them proud. Exactly. And so I always still feel, oh, I have to prove myself. So what does that mean? Is that I don't always kind of take a step back. And now that I'm doing that, I take a step back and I make space for the people around me. And I'm much more an apprentice. I'm proud of who I have become. And I want to share that with others. And I love working with my colleagues and helping them grow and sharing that things with them. But again, there are still moments where I know I have to stop playing small.
But is that where leadership starts? With appreciating yourself?
Absolutely. It does. But, and I do think there is sort of the back and forth between challenging yourself, but then taking the time, as you said, also to stop and to be proud of what you've done. And to really embody that. and then move on. I think often, especially what I see in super fast-growing technology companies, is people are running to deliver results.
Yeah.
We only have so much cash flow, so we have to do as much as possible. And there's not enough time for talent development, to just stopping and saying, guys,
Take a look back.
Exactly, exactly.
A lot of people are talking about the curious leader, and they really like the curiosity. So Garrett asked, he is curious if you ever looked at personal health and habits as an indicator for strong leadership.
Well, great question. So I think especially what we're seeing now in the pandemic is that health is an incredibly important part of what makes a strong leader. I think if you look after yourself, then you can also look after your colleagues. But you need a strong mind, you need a strong body. And health to me also goes hand in hand with taking a step back, taking a moment to stop and see what's going on. And health comes, of course, in many different forms. It comes in eating healthily, it comes in exercising, in meditating, but it's all that making room for yourself. So,
And that's important to find.
Yeah.
And this is also interesting. So how can oneself use curiosity as a strength in a working environment where everyone protects their own goals and not to fall into the trap to add a new task of workload on yourself?
Yeah, so there is curiosity for curiosity's sake, and there is curiosity that really advances the task at hand. There's very much also about how you show your curiosity. And I'm sure we all know those people who are just always asking questions. They're like, oh, there's that person again who's asking a question. And it's almost as if they're asking questions, they're curious because they want their voice to be heard. So think about how you are showing up as being curious. Be consciously curious, be reflective. And yes, if it does lead to another work stream, well, then based on your question, it should be a work stream that really adds to the advancement of what you're working on. And if it doesn't, then hopefully your curiosity should be able to mention that as well.
And what if you work in a company, someone asks, and your CEO, for example, isn't really curious or open? How do you help him or her to open up?
Well, it's a great question. We see that certainly that there are people who are not as comfortable as being curious, and then perhaps they're curious about their business, but they're not that curious about the people around them. And so what you might do is mirror some curiosity where you share something small about yourself and then ask them, how does that make you feel? So for example, there are many leaders in this pandemic who are working or so leading organizations with physical locations. So think about stores, think about theaters, think about restaurants. Think about those leaders where all those places, or they were shut down for a long period of time. You might ask them, how does that make you feel? That must be really difficult to carry such a responsibility for an organization. And it keeps me up at night. How do you feel? So slowly give them some language, but it might help them by first showing a bit of vulnerability yourself.
Maybe let them feel a little bit how it feels.
Yeah.
To be curious.
Exactly. And it's as if someone is fairly more close, the way we call that is that they're armored. And there might be reasons for them to be armored.
They're wearing their armor to protect themselves.
Exactly, to protect themselves. And often this has to do with their identity. So this can be very difficult, depending on where you sit in the organization, how close you are to them, for them to feel safe enough. It has to do with safety, because obviously there is something that has triggered them in their past that has caused them to build that armor around them. So I think my ask to you, the person who asked this, and to all of you who are listening to this, when you see that someone is armored, please be kind and gentle to them, because again, something will have triggered them. So think about how you might help them rather than judge them for being armored. And it is by asking kindness questions and ask them about their armor.
That's interesting. Do you think, Claudia asks, people open easier to female leaders?
So I don't think people open to female leaders, but I do know that people generally open up more to the female qualities and of leaders. And I think that both men and women have these female qualities. And these female qualities are also much more needed in today's world, where we need much more transformational leadership. And those qualities are care, they are vulnerability, they are the ability to relate to other people, they are about creativity. And again, both men and women have those qualities, but unfortunately, too often I see women shut down some of those qualities in order to compete with their male colleagues. And I really hope that more women, but also men, show these female qualities and bring them to bear, because it is so needed in today's world. It is so needed. By showing some of that vulnerability yourself, you create more of that psychological safety that will help others open up as well, and will help everyone be more curious.
Yeah, because empathy is not just for one gender, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. Someone asks, do you see a difference between men and women when it comes to curiosity?
Do I see a difference? No, I wouldn't say so. No, there are both highly curious men and women. I don't think that's a gender thing. Perhaps if I can just take that one level further, of course we talk a lot about diversity. And I think that all of us could be more curious about diversity in the broader sense. It is not just about numbers, it is about the voices that we hear in the boardroom, that we hear in the executive team, and be more curious, not just about, again, counting who do you have in terms of diversity in your team, but it is being curious about having their voice heard. That is important.
And do you also see difference in culture, for example, in the curiosity? Are some cultures more curious than others?
Yes, and this is very much from my own experience, also having worked and lived in Asia. I must say, especially as a Dutch person, and I am fairly direct in asking people questions. And I've quickly realized that, especially in China, that was just not the way it was done. And so generally, after a while, when I'm interviewing someone, I do ask them about their past. I do ask them about their childhood, about all these, like trying to understand their identities. So showing that curiosity. And in China, it was right away, I was pushed back into, here are my business results. Yeah. So I think, I'm sure it's that I needed to learn a different way of being curious in China, and also other parts of Asia. So I don't think people are less curious, it's about how you show that curiosity. Because in China, of course, the culture, it's all about not losing face. So I had to understand that and then build trust before I could allow myself to be more curious. Yeah. And of course, in Holland, we should all be aware that we can be very blunt with our curiosity. So beware of that. And also, by the way, if you go to the States, so for example, at the moment, working on several board mandates, and we're looking for American candidates or US-based candidates, and we have to be very careful in the States what we ask them. So again, being Dutch and being quite direct with my questions, I really have to formulate them differently when I speak to people in the States.
So if you have a team, you work in a team, and you're watching right now, you work in a team, how do you implement that curiosity?
When you're working in a team, how do you implement? So I would start with role modeling. Role model the curiosity, and also talk about it openly. So if we all now know that curiosity is really what creates better leaders, what ultimately also really drives innovation in a company, and makes it more fun and performance savvy. Yeah, I would say role model it together, and also ask each other, but really listen to each other as well. Experiment together. It's all that. It's getting rid of perhaps the armament that you have as a team, because if all of you show that curiosity, but again, also feel comfortable as you're experimenting with curiosity, give each other kind feedback. is another one of my hopes, that we are just more kind with each other, by giving each other the room to experiment, by giving each other the room to make mistakes, and to give each other the feedback to say, hey, I realize that you're trying to be curious, but you know, that question is not really, that hurts me, or that question is so out of our scope, it doesn't help us. Right, so it's, there's a lot more gentleness, but fantastic question, and I really hope that everybody starts working, being more curious tomorrow.
You also said we should be curious about ourselves, and someone is asking, how should we do that, and how should we let go of negative, of old ideas of ourselves?
Yeah. So I would recommend, and some of this can be done alone, but it sometimes can be very difficult to go on this journey of understanding who you are and your identity, what might be some of those self-limiting beliefs on your own. And I know that today you're spending your day again with some fantastic mentors. Some of those mentors might be able and willing to do that, but some of them also might be more focused on being business mentors. But find someone you trust. Find someone to work with. But there's also a lot of work that you can do by yourself. How often have you really reflected on what have been the big life events that have shaped me, who I am today? Start writing that down. Start journaling. Start really reflecting. Take time out. Take a step back and think about, as I said, write down your identity and who you have become. And I think that is a great start. And it's not just a one-time thing. For me, most days I reflect. Even when I'm in a meeting, I'm asking myself, hey, hold on a second, what's going on? And I stop and I breathe. I kind of extract myself for a second. And then I actually call out also what I see, what's going on. For me still, it's a great way of continuing to learn. So you can go deep, very deep, you could go far back, but it's also in the day-to-day being curious about why you're doing the things you're doing in the moment.
Someone also asked, do you also train executives to be?
Ha!
And how can they reach you?
Absolutely, absolutely. We do. It's one of the fantastic things at Egon Zehnder, how we are combining search with leadership development. And it's exactly for these reasons, unlocking that potential for the greater good, I would say. But yeah, absolutely. How do you reach me? Through our website, on the Egon Zehnder website. It's a fantastic thing to work with these leaders, and every time it is just amazing to see how these leaders can unfold if they allow themselves. Often in the beginning for them also it's difficult, it can be quite scary. So first we have to create a trust relationship as well.
Speaking about it, it's tough, right? You have to be bold to try it. And someone is asking, maybe showing feelings comes sometimes across as emotional, yeah, or maybe weak. Mm. So how do we make that work to our advantage as women working in the tech sector?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, what's wrong with being emotional? I agree with you, we don't want to come across as weak. But why at some point did someone decide that being emotional is not a good thing? And clearly we don't want to go from here to there, because for a large part, we as women, we have shut that piece down in order to compete with colleagues who show more of those male qualities. But what if all of us will allow ourselves to be that little bit more emotional? And again, I agree with you, if you start every meeting in tears, that's probably not very effective. So it's also part of thinking for yourself, allowing what emotion will you allow in the moment. But I have found myself that there have been situations where I've allowed the vulnerability to come through, where I have shed a few tears. And you know what? It's made that moment more real. It's made the moment more real. And I've seen in those moments, especially with colleagues, how people stop and people actually feel. And people get out of their heads. So it's actually a beautiful moment. Yeah, I think, so yeah, let me just stop there. It's allowing it, it's putting me on a train of thought.
No,
because
this is beautiful. And I do recognize this. It may feel scary, but we're all humans, right?
Yeah.
And we should help each other.
Yeah, absolutely. We should help. And I think if you would allow some of it to happen, to allow some of that emotion to show, see what it does to the colleagues around you. And if you feel that others around you might get very uncomfortable, because again, that's how we've grown up in today's business world. And if that happens, why don't you call it out? And hopefully one of your colleagues will call it out and say, hold on a second, what's happening here? One of our colleagues is becoming quite emotional, and why are we just kind of wiping it off the table? Right, let's stop and understand, is there anything we can do for our colleague? How can we provide better care, or let's really listen? So if someone around you has that kind of emotional event, I would hope that all of you call that out. Let's not wipe things away anymore. We have to allow ourselves to really show up as the human beings that we are, to show that vulnerability.
Do you think everyone can be a good leader?
It depends if the emphasis is on good or on leader. But let me,
Good leader.
let me take that sort of both ways. Can everybody be a good leader? And with good at Egon Zehnder, we mean leadership for a better world. And good can be in the little things that you do. And I think everybody can do that. So this is that human kindness. It was even yesterday when I was talking with a few people, with a CEO, and I asked him, so how are you working with your board, and what kind of feedback are you getting, or how involved are they? And he said, look, it's great. There are a lot more moments of interaction. And they do ask me how I'm doing, but it kind of seems like a formality. I wish they'd ask me a few levels deeper, how am I really doing? So the next time you ask someone, how are you? Look them in the eyes, smile, and really listen for their answer. That's one thing. That's one thing we can all do to be good leaders. But then, of course, there's the bigger being a good leader in today's world. There's a lot of talk about purpose, about doing good by caring for the environment, caring about lifelong learning in your organization. There are many other causes. And purpose is incredibly important for us because it is about the why we do what we do. So can everybody be a good leader? Yes, but then not everybody who says that they have a purpose actually lives or carries out that purpose. So there are certain people who are much more, I would say, anchored in society, and I think they are most set up to be the good leaders. They care, they're more curious, but also they have these transformational qualities that I talked about earlier, some of these female qualities. And those are the ones that we see come out as the better leaders.
Someone here also said, and I think that's a really nice statement for the end, in the long run, people will always prefer to work for an empathetic leader, someone who genuinely cares for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I feel incredibly lucky that in both my role in venture capital and now at Egon Zehnder, we have a chairwoman who really cares. It's incredibly, and she shows her vulnerability. And what a difference it makes in terms of motivation for the people. So totally agree. What a great statement indeed.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure you're getting a really big virtual applause because people are reacting amazing on your talk.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for having me here, Ingeloo. It's been a great pleasure to spend the morning with you.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for watching today. And if you have a mentor session, then you are one of the lucky ones because not all of you could get a ticket. So you've received a Microsoft Teams invite. We'll see you during the day. Good luck today. If you just were here to watch the plenary program, thank you for joining. Thank you for your questions. And follow Female Tech Heroes, and we hope to see you next time.